AWA+D, and we're so thrilled to have you here. I want to welcome, first of all, our presenter, Natalie Dalton from Bespoke Careers. I have gotten a preview of her presentation and it's amazing. You're going to learn so much. Before we get started, I also have a couple people to introduce. One is Alex James, who is also here from Bespoke Careers. So Alex, if you can wave and say hello. We're very pleased. Yeah, sorry, we're very pleased that you're able to join us tonight.
Yeah, it's good to be here. We're excited to take part.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent. And then also, I would like to introduce Meg Coffey, who is president of AWA+D. I'll let Meg say a couple words before we jump into the program.
I just wanted to welcome everybody. And if we have any new members today, we especially welcome you and hope to see you in future events. We have a lot of great stuff coming up. And keep an eye out and keep your calendars free on May 14th and May 21st for our annual symposium, which is going to be pretty fantastic this year. So yeah, welcome to all.
Right. Thank you, Meg. All right, so let's get down to why we are all here. We want to talk about our resumes. And so without further ado, Natalie, if you can just go and say a few words about yourself and then just jump in and welcome. We're so glad. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is my professional version of myself, the headshot. I'm Natalie, as you have so generously introduced me. I'm an architecture consultant or recruiter with Bespoke Careers. We're a global recruitment company just dedicated to the industry of architecture and design. So my job is to connect job seekers, architects and designers, landscape, interior, and everything in between with local employers in Los Angeles. We also focus on other markets. And it's a job I really enjoy doing, and it's allowed me to keep connected with the LA community, the design community, and you know, talk to people, even if it's through a screen, almost every day. So that's what I do in my day-to-day. And before joining Bespoke Careers, I worked for the LA chapter of the AIA and the West Side Urban Forum. So lots of familiar names and faces and firms as we go along. And I just wanted to also say, if you have any questions or want to even add to anything that I'm speaking, the great part of this forum is it's open to your contributions. It's not a webinar, so we can see each other and you can type into the chat, or you can could even interrupt me if it's super urgent and throw in a question or clarification or something as we go along. So we'll be keeping an eye on the chat and try to address those questions. And if we don't get to them in the middle of everything, we'll circle back at the end. So we'll definitely have time for that. I went backwards. So before I jump into the nitty gritty of everything, I just wanted to take a second to contextualize this conversation, because a lot is happening and a lot is changing in architecture and design. I think generally speaking, we're seeing a big pickup in hiring, and on record, I think it was a headline on LinkedIn today, it's the best month on record in 2 years. So even pre-pandemic, hiring is making a big change. There is a tendency for the majority of roles, or maybe even projects, as you're seeing them come up, to be very, very specific, as firms and individuals have had time to sort of reflect on the direction they want to be moving in. And I think there's still a lot of change as we adjust to the new normal. We're talking about the backdrops behind us and how we connect every day, and all of that is still in flux. It's important to note that women have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic overall. I thought this headline from Forbes was really interesting in that statistically speaking, 1 in 4 women are planning on setting up their own business going forward post-pandemic. 60% are planning a pivot in their career, and over half of women surveyed believe that COVID has provided new professional opportunities for them in the long run. So it's an interesting sort of like mixed bag there in terms of how we're responding to this ultra volatile new world we live in. And so the big question, I think, with most job seekers, or as Carol and I were talking about earlier, also like anybody who's putting together a project resume, is how do you get seen, and how do you really connect with the person who is potentially reviewing your resume and portfolio and cover email, whether it's a potential client or a potential employer. And that's what we're going to really delve into in this chat, is how to get considered for these new opportunities, how to show up, how to represent yourself and stand out from the pack. Like I said, I look at resumes and portfolios all day, every day. So I have a pretty good sense of what catches the eye of hiring managers and directors. And I believe that to be clearly, it boiling down to clearly presenting who you are and your authentic self. Easier said than done. I think the tactic for coming across as your authentic self has to have sales embodied into it. So it comes down to selling yourself, who you are, what your value is to others, but not in the sense of like selling out and being cheesy and marketing yourself in a way that feels uncomfortable or inauthentic. I think it's important to note that we're selling ourselves all the time, even if like pre-pandemic times, you were talking to a friend and trying to convince them to go to a movie that you wanted to see, and they didn't want to go to that movie, and you kind of do your pitch for how great the movie would be or what you've heard about it. That's authentically selling something, and it's something that we do all the time. It could be convincing somebody to go to a certain restaurant for dinner. So that same concept, not phony, not false or inauthentic, but passionately urging somebody to see something in the way that you do, is part of that process. And the success of that experience is mutuality. So delivering a message to a person that's memorable and believable. I'm sure we've all had that moment where you've been convinced, and there's a huge part of that in what you're putting together for your CV, whether it be professional or for a project. Essentially, your CV is your foot in the door that leads to the next step of getting to know each other. So I think an interesting question to preface this conversation is to ask you all, what do you think the average time an HR manager spends looking at your resume? And like, you can throw up some numbers of seconds, minutes, you can unmute yourself.
Throw it in the chat?
You can throw it in the chat. Let's see, where's my chat window? You have to read out some chat.
Oh, we've got like 30 seconds, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 seconds.
Okay.
Couple more minutes, yeah.
So what's crazy is that the answer on average is 7.4 seconds.
Seconds. Crazy.
That is like, whew, I got chills. That's a really short amount of time. Like what we just spent answering the question. So clearly, short attention spans means that you need to clearly communicate who you are and what the value you bring to the table is. Period. It has to be the first thing that somebody sees, because you can't trust that a hiring manager is going to be looking at a footnote on page 3 or even scrolling to the last page of your portfolio. The common mistake I see on CVs time and time again is just a list of responsibilities at your last job. And it's really not about your responsibilities. That's what you can talk about in a job interview, but a CV should really be a summary of what makes you you and what your best work is. So a few bullet points in terms of best practices for CV. The number one thing I think is to have a hierarchy. Make the most important thing on the page at the top of the page. So you can see in this example on the screen, first name, last name, and what type of designer you are. You shouldn't have to like dig into the footnotes and go down to education and figure out that you went to school for industrial design, but you've only practiced in interior design. Like, no one wants to connect the dots. They just want to know straight up. So having a hierarchy, having the most important information at the very top of the page is really important. And rather than list responsibilities, what you want to do is sell your achievements at past or current position. So whether that is successfully pitched a project that brought X amount of money into the office, or saw 15 projects from schematic design through to construction administration, or X, Y, and Z. What are your true wins at your current employer or past employer? You definitely want to make your strengths obvious and use numbers to quantify what you've been able to do. So like I said, whether it's number of projects, percentage of return clients, money saved, money generated, whatever type of like solid number and statistics that you can put on there gives context to how your work compares at your current or past role and how it could apply to a future position. You can sort of ask yourself, like, put yourself in the hiring manager's chair, right? How have you helped save your money for, how have you helped save your firm money? How have you helped made your team more efficient or work together more productively? Even something like creating, we talked about like a bingo game to bring clients together at the start of the pandemic and have that touch point. Like, that's important to what you're doing and what a potential employer would think is creative and would stand out in their mind. So some of those things that we sort of overlook as a day-to-day creative responsibilities of our job, this is a place where you have a chance to highlight it. Same goes for software. If you're totally teaching the rest of the office Revit, or if you've streamlined project management in Bluebeam, or you have research and development skills that you've honed in on certain projects, put it in your CV. And definitely just make sure that you're communicating the things that you feel that you're the best at and the things that you love doing in your job, because that might not be captured at all in a list of responsibilities. All that being said, it's still really important to keep your CV simple and have a clear layout with different sections. So you have education, you have technical skills, you have experience. I really like to have like a personal statement right at the top when I was talking about hierarchy, giving them that really straightforward summary of who you are. And to use simple resume templates, I really recommend canva.com. It's like canvas that you paint on without the S. It's free. It's like InDesign for anybody who doesn't have InDesign. They have 1,000 templates. You can just search minimal resume template and it'll give you something similar to this example here. You can customize the colors, you can customize the fonts, you can add a photo of your face, you can do whatever you want, but I just really think that there are so many resources out there to creatively present your resume. No need to default to like the one Microsoft Word template that exists, because I'll know that you're using it. So yeah, canva.com is great. Keep it simple, spell check 1,000 times. This is something that you would just go crazy if you had to read how many times I've seen architecture spelled incorrectly. You really want to make sure that with a simple resume, you're making the simple details come together. Print it out, share it with a friend, put it through spell check, look at it twice, look at it 3 times. You really don't want to have a small error like that catching the eye in those 7.4 seconds, because that's like a yes or no type of error that someone could see and just move on to the next resume. And I hate to say it because it sounds like so cut and dry, but honestly, just check that spelling. And then in that same line of be simple, you also want to be relevant, and you want to show your most recent experience in chronological order. So having the most relevant, most recent experience at the top of the page, going down to your past experience. I also tend to have the same advice for education. Sometimes templates like this one will have education at the top of the page, and that can be very relevant if you just wrapped up an excellent master's program, or if you have like a special certification that you want to highlight. But generally speaking, it's my impression that having education first thing at the top of the page connects you to that academic experience. So it may make you look like a recent student, or it may make it look like that's your biggest qualification. So generally speaking, I like to have education and contact information at the bottom of the page, because they're still going to get there if they're interested in what you have at the top. And in relevant, underneath the relevant bullet point, I would say also only describe roles that pertain to the job you're applying to. This is hard when you're first starting out and you might not have the relevant experience, or maybe a past job that wasn't quite in the same industry shows other skills that you bring to the table, and that's a little bit different. But generally, if you have been working in architecture and design and you're applying for an architecture and design position, keep it to what you know and you want to focus on, because anything else can be seen as a bit of a distraction. And lastly, make it concise. I know this is hard for long, successful, amazing careers, because there's a lot more work to show. And I think a good rule of thumb generally is to aim for 1 page per 10 years of professional experience. That way, if you have a project list, you can carry it on sort of relevant to the firms that you were with for those most significant projects. Also, one of my favorite things to do with project lists, and so many firms have now moved to having their portfolios online, or at least a majority of their projects, is to hyperlink any projects that you know exist online, so that it creates like an easy click through for potential employers or potential clients. We were talking about architectural bingo. Not everybody knows like a project title or address off the top of their head as like AIA award winner, or DZine project of the year. So any way that you can link your project list or recent projects, or like something great online, it could even be an award that you won, to that direct website, you can create that sort of like dynamic interaction with your website or with your resume.
Can I ask a question? Break in here. Sorry, just going to do it. If you try and do a hyperlink that's like going to a firm project or whatever, do you feel like because it's on the internet, it's sort of a free-for-all, or do you need to have some sort of permission from your firm to be able to do that? If you know you worked on the project, have you found that to be an issue at all?
I think if it's on the internet, it's totally for everybody
Okay.
to refer to. There's obviously some employers who might feel otherwise, but in those cases, like, I think if you have an NDA, or if the project's still under wraps, like, of course you can just say like, I have this, innovative project that's under NDA, so I can't really talk about it, but you wouldn't have the hyperlink to link through. But if it's on the internet, then
okay,
it's yours for the taking, is my opinion.
Cool. Thank you.
Great question. And so now I wanted to just quickly zoom out and open up some CV examples. These are just anonymous sort of best practices from our system that I like, just in terms of how clean they are. Let's see, can you all see my screen? So you've got your name at the top, experience is in order of most recent down to past. You've got really concise role, company, dates, and location. This is a kind of different type of style, but very minimalistic. You can see sort of most impressive projects, a little bit more. I think this is a good example in terms of like earned firm and AIA honor award, talking about a mix between like project specific versus team specific. You've got your education. I would personally flip skills and education, because I like to sort of have skills as the leading most relevant thing. but you've got a mix here between hard skills, soft skills, and software skills, which I also think is really great. Really sort of minimal, and the whole point is to just give you that taste, right? Giving a sense of who you are without like telling your whole life story, because if you try to do that on one page, we'd all go crazy.
Natalie, can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
When you have, say, stayed with a firm for multiple years and you've moved up, what is the best way for you to show you've been at the same firm, but like have moved up in roles? Like, do you like to put multiple roles and the dates that you were there? What's kind of the best rule of thumb for that?
I'd like to do it where you have the firm, your total dates, so like 2016 to present or 2010 to present, the location of the firm, and then first bullet point, you could say promoted to project manager within 2 years of starting at the firm, started as architectural designer or something like that. You can also say project manager as your current role, and then you could mention in the bottom, you know, joined as architectural designer, and however you feel the best summary of that process was, or that promotion was, I think is good to do as a bullet point. I don't generally like when applicants either on LinkedIn or their CV have like the same firm, but like repeated multiple times for the different roles, because then it's really confusing for the person to sort of put those dots together. Like, wait, you were there and then you left and then you came back. Like, it's kind of, however most straightforward you can say it, the better. Like I said, it's like some things in our professional career or even our personal life, we think like, oh, it's so straightforward. Like, you didn't know, that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years. But people come on here and they just see this blank page and they're like, who are you? So lead with your strengths, which is your current role, your current position, and then mention your process, like what made that impressive for your employer. Clearly, they recognized your hard work and they promoted you in your time there. So it's a great thing to highlight. Great question. Here's another example where you've got really, really simple experience. Like this is, I obviously had to clean it up so you don't know who anybody is, but you've got your position, or sorry, the firm, location, position, years. This doesn't show anything about what you're doing in those offices. I think this is a good strategy if sort of the firm or the position speaks for itself. If you're a project manager and you're applying for another project manager role and it's more about like the firms that you were with and those firms are readily recognizable names, you could probably keep it this simple. It's not my favorite type of resume, but it gets the job done and it's simple enough to still invite a later conversation about that experience. You've got education at the bottom, which I love. You've also got community involvement. Any extra like skills and things that you can add to give context to who you are is great. Love the objective at the top, saying who you are as a designer, working within multiple disciplines or typologies. I generally like a little bit more specifics, like motivated and passionate designer with 8 years of experience in aviation, or with Los Angeles specific experience, or I've worked in California, New York, and Vietnam. Like, I don't know exactly what you've been up to, but the more that you can add context there, the better, because a lot of these are just pretty words. Neat way of showing your software proficiency. I think that's great.
I have a question on that.
Mhm.
I've gotten feedback on the skills of like the kind of like the dots ranking, like this person's really good with AutoCAD, but it
Right.
also, somebody told me once, it also highlights like, okay, this applicant's not so great at Rhino, and like because you're
Right.
not, because it's how it's
Less impressive.
What's your
compared to
thoughts on like
others.
the ranking system?
That's a great question. And I think no matter how you slice it, it's hard because it's subjective, right? It's either a self-evaluation or it's a third-party evaluation, but sometimes even employer doesn't know how to contextualize that. Like we use Knowledge Smart for software testing, and anything over 60% is great, but 60% in most contexts is not great. So I think personally, I would just list the software that you're most skilled in. I wouldn't necessarily make it graphically appealing unless that's part of what you're applying for. If you're a graphic designer and like you're highlighting your graphic skills, go all in, like make it super visual. But I agree with you in that if I looked at this resume, I would be like, ooh, this person isn't that good at Rhino. And then you might see the next resume page and they've got like Rhino 5 out of 5. And it might like make you compare those two. Whereas just a clean list and the fact that Rhino is included in the software means that they're familiar. In my personal resume, I would write something like proficient at or fluent in, and familiar with would be maybe like the most basic software, just to acknowledge that I know that they exist. Great question. Then you've got some awards. Again, I would hyperlink these so that you could just like hyperlink, you know, right click while you're creating the PDF or Word document, exporting as a PDF. And then that way someone, if they wanted to, 2010 might be a little bit hard, but most of these you can like click right through to the website, read more about this award, have more context of what you've been doing. And then references available upon request. I don't know. I don't think that that's super necessary to include, but let's see one more here. This is a UK resume, and I wanted to include this one because it's got a nice mix of visuals. In case you all haven't noticed already, architects and designers are extremely visual human beings. So the more sort of dynamic that you can make even a CV with some of your project images, like this one is a great practice. Again, I would start with employment as first, right under this really nice, concise description of who this person is. Registered architect with 3.5 years postgraduate experience. I mean, this is a little bit UK speak, but they also list like most important need to know: British, when they were born, languages they speak. You could do something different that could show like work authorization or languages that you speak or different typologies that you practice in. But I think this one is nice because it gives that visual effect. You've got these awards that, again, you could hyperlink. And then the employment description is nice. It's kind of more of like a narrative format to sort of give you like the arc of their career in this place. And that's probably well suited to being at a firm for, you know, more than 2 years. Let's see if we can get to, I think it's the second page. And then you get here onto the second page and it's a little bit more of a project list, but it's still engaging because you have like this visual focus with the images, and then you go back and it's got a nice breakdown between like what the project type was, where it was, cost, and stage of the project. And we can talk a little bit more about that. I'm sure you'll talk a lot more about that when you go into future events on portfolios, but I think it's great to touch on those basics of project cost, location, stage of the project, and typology. So those are some CV examples. And like I said, canva.com has just about 1,000 templates that you can use that are already, in a lot of ways, already structured with this type of hierarchy. So I'll quickly touch on portfolios before I go into LinkedIn optimization, because I think that goes hand in hand with your CV these days of our digital world and job seeking. There are going to be a handful of future AWA+D events dedicated to portfolios, so I'm not going to go into the super nitty gritty today. but I'll just touch on a few things in terms of best practices for job seekers. So I think an important part with your portfolio is to really show your range. Unless you're applying for a single studio and a single firm, your portfolio is really an opportunity to show who you are across project types and across different mediums. So the basics, of course, is to have images and concise text for projects to clearly explain your role in the projects and the process behind the design. I think that this is like the golden handcuffs, right? Because so many people have worked on a project, but then maybe they only have construction documentation sets to show for it. It's fine to show the beautiful finished photo of the project. It's important to show what the project really is, as long as you have text that clearly explains how you were involved, what you produced, how big your team was, and sort of all the ways that you connected into that project. Don't be afraid to show the beautiful render that they pitched to the client when you were in the room for, even if you didn't produce the render yourself. You can write render produced, render outsourced or render produced by graphics team. But giving someone a full sense of what the project is really important in your portfolio. And being able to clearly describe your role and your involvement is an example of your communication skills. And I would say on that same note, your editing skills, because you don't want your portfolio to just be like this endless showcase of work that you've done. You want to ideally keep it concise, much like your resume. And I would say the ideal length for me personally is about 15 pages. I find that I don't scroll much further than that, just because it's like, what more could I possibly be learning on page 16 that I didn't see in the first few pages? So that's what I would say about range. It's also an opportunity to show your style. I have two portfolio examples I'll quickly open. They're more interiors oriented, but the layout of your portfolio also is an opportunity to showcase your design skills. You can make it your own. You can have overlap, or you can have super, super minimalist layout. That is also speaking to your design aesthetic, regardless of what the project design is. And it's also important, like this picture here, to have different types of media. So you could have hand drawing, you could have graphics, you could have sketches, you could have an on-site construction admin photo, and then you have the beautiful finished product or a beautiful finished render. It's cool to sort of show all those different aspects. And then a good one, especially this page kind of shows it itself, is to make sure to format correctly. So nowadays, a lot of times I'll get links to a portfolio that people have uploaded to Issue or Archinect, and you really want to make sure most of the time that you're sending forward a PDF version of your portfolio. And you want to ideally export it so that you have, it can be read 2 pages at a time, side by side, but you want to export as single slides so that when you look at a page, you can read what's going on the page, because everybody knows how it is to like weirdly zoom in on a PDF to try to read what your project involvement was or like what the typology is. So you definitely want to make text legible. And again, you want to spell check 1,000 times through. It's probably even easier to make spelling mistakes in a portfolio because most of these are created in InDesign or a similar platform where spell check isn't as automatic, or maybe there's multiple text boxes that you're moving around. So just really have many eyes on your finished project. And like I said, PDF is preferred, and hopefully you can export that file to be less than 10 megabytes. Last thing is to keep it updated. Your portfolio obviously evolves as your work evolves and as you go along with the firm. I find so often when you're in the depths of the weeds of pitching projects and completing competitions and always moving on to the next thing, that it's hard to keep like a running documentation of the work that you're doing. Carol touched on this earlier. You don't realize until you're like out the door, that what you've accomplished in the last year. So keeping track as you go along, taking pictures off of, in a meeting that you're in or on site, keeping a folder on your computer, and just like keeping good track of what you're accomplishing over your career, because it all just goes like this at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's what, can I jump in right here? Because we
Yeah.
talked about this like before the thing started, because the thing that I didn't learn until I had been until I'd been doing this for a while is that it's important to keep your resume updated and to do a resume to get the job. But there will come a time when your resume is needed to help get projects for your firm. And so can I share my screen?
I think I can show.
And so I have hang on. I have what I call my big resume, and it is a document. I don't know if I'm going to do it. Yeah. And it is a document, maybe, is it showing up? That has got like sort of just a real general, here it is, here's all the registrations, blah, blah, blah. But then it is like all of the projects with like a short project description, the size, and all that stuff that I've ever kind of worked on, split by sort of job type. And if you try and wait 5 years after you've been in a firm, or you're getting ready to leave, and to try and figure this all out, and you go to your next project list and know that, I just am working at a firm called Kitchell now. And so obviously I have a lot of experience that's non-Kitchell, but then I have Kitchell experience. And so this stuff is something that I think just like keep track of it, just keep a running document. You don't have to make it look pretty. It'd be great if there were pictures, but what you really want is just a Word document that then a marketing department or whatever, I'm going to stop sharing right now, Natalie, but that a marketing department can then take your resume and they can pull projects, because you're going to be going after certain types of projects. And so that's another type of resume to sort of just, keep track of as you work on firms. It doesn't have to be as elaborate as a portfolio, but you should at least sort of just keep a running document as you go to keep up.
Absolutely. And you can take those same projects, like if you were at a firm trying to make a project pitch, you could just highlight, copy and paste those relevant projects. Or if you were planning your next career move, it's kind of the same concept, where if you're applying for a specific studio, you have those relevant projects already there in your master. So thank you, Carol. That's so cool. I'll just pull up one quick portfolio so we can just keep moving and grooving on here. Like I said, there's going to be a couple future events with AWA+D where you'll talk about more portfolio specifics. But I think this is a good one just because it's super minimalist, and it's, like I said, it's interior design, but you've got maybe a graphic that you created for a project or some sort of artsy render in Lumion. I'm not sure what that is, but usually you would have your name on this first page. They've been removed for privacy sake. Table of contents with type of projects. I would make this more straightforward. This seems to be just residential, but I would say, pages 1 through 10 residential in London, and pages 10 through 20 commercial in Spain or whatever. But I like this really nice, clean layout, very minimalist. Ignore the name. Or I guess that's not the person's name, it's the project name. But talk about what the project is, a little bit of the design philosophy, some of the interior details. This is kind of more, in my opinion, more of like a firm profile for this project because of what information is pictured here. I would go into more specific about what state is the project at? Is it completed? Is it in process? What was this person's job? Were they project manager? Were they project architect? Or project interior architect? I don't know. But so I would do it a little bit differently, but I think it's nice. I mean, it's just visually beautiful, right? This is a little bit more straightforward remodel of a single family home, the location, talking about some of these custom details, and who any of the collaborators were. So this is just pretty. I mean, it's not in terms of content reinventing any wheels. This one is probably even more simple, where you just have, let me make sure this, super small portion of the project, any type of like innovative materiality that's being used, who the client was, size, location, and this is typology. Boom, super straightforward. I think simplicity is key, because then you can talk about all these things when you're in an interview and have more insight there. So just a couple quick portfolio examples. Moving along. We'll talk next about, where are you? Let's play. These are the upcoming AWA+D events that I mentioned. There's going to be a networking event. There's going to be 2 portfolio events in April and May, and a quick shine up of your interview skills. So there's so much more to come. I'll try to focus on just the job seeking part today. And you can check those all out on the AWA+D website. So next up with your cover letter, I will just keep this short and sweet. Do it or don't. But if you do, make it count. I think there's so often cover letters that are just copy paste sent to the same job, sent to everybody, and that's boring. No one is reading that. But if somebody addresses a cover letter to me, addressed at Bespoke Careers, I know that they've taken the time to see who I am, to make the address correct, to tailor it to what this opportunity is, and that already is 10 steps ahead of whoever else is putting something forward. This is important, and it's usually ignored. Now, a lot of times cover letters are becoming optional. So if you're gonna take the option, make it count. The reason for a cover letter is to say something that's not already been said in your CV or your portfolio. Let that sink in. The point of a cover letter is to say something else about who you are, is to talk about who you are beyond your CV and your portfolio. So you really want to tailor it to the opportunity and use it as a chance to summarize your value or what you bring to this unique role or unique project. You can talk about why you're applying to this specific company. What about their work is interesting to you? Have you focused on something similar in the past? The better you get at talking about your work, the easier it is to show somebody your value. And this is that opportunity. So also, it's a chance to summarize relevant projects, awards, anything they could have glanced over in your CV that is specific to this. You can highlight it again. Nice to have that summary. As I mentioned, I've saying something like, I have 8 years of postgraduate experience working on single family projects in Greater LA. I'm well versed in each project stage, from design development through to construction administration. Sometimes that sentence says more than what 10 pages of a resume will say. You'd be surprised. And it's also good to state your availability. I'm available full time and I can start immediately, or I'm available on contract or part-time basis and I can start in 2 weeks and these are my rates. Whatever it is specific to that job, you want to just be as clear as possible about how you would potentially fit in, highlighting the skills that set you apart, whether it's a specific software that's requested in the job ad, or it's a remote work opportunity and you've been experienced in that in the last 12 months or maybe longer. Maybe there's someone you know at the firm. Highlight what sets you up uniquely for this opportunity. And then lastly, like I mentioned, it could be in your CV or it could be here, is to clearly state your work authorization. If you're a visa holder, you just want to be clear with your employer what the process is. Maybe it's easier than they know. So the more like context you can give about what that requires is just great, answering questions that might pop up in somebody's head. So specific to finding job, I think it's great to take action now. Like I mentioned at the beginning, the market is bouncing back. It's the best month that we've had on record since I joined Bespoke in February of 2020. Lots of hiring upswing happening right now. So definitely reach out if you are in fact job seeking. I think in general, recruiting Bespoke has been my first experience working with recruitment, and I had a very different idea of what recruiters do in my life before Bespoke. But I think strategic hiring is an important thing to bring up here. Working with a recruiter is a great way to keep an eye on the market, even if you're happy where you're at. If you have sort of a long-term strategy, we talked in the beginning about, many people will be making shifts once the dust has settled. So if you were ever thinking about relocating to a different city or sort of want to take a big leap and you've been at your firm for a while, working with a recruiter is a great way to keep an eye out for leadership or management or big types of changes that you might not even have the time to be doing while you're working full time.
And I'm also going to jump in to do the pitch with a recruiter. I think a lot of people's idea of recruiters is it's somebody who reaches out to them because they saw them on LinkedIn. But there are, if you do a research and you find recruiters, especially that specialize in the AEC industry, like Bespoke, you can go to them and list your resume and like put your stuff, give their stuff to them so that they've got it. And I didn't know that. It's not a one-way, it's just not a one-way thing. You can definitely seek out recruiters if you, again, as Natalie said, looking to move to another area or you're looking to make a move and you don't really know how to do it, but reach out to somebody and at least investigate whether there are opportunities to put your resume someplace.
Exactly. And it's like way more legitimate to have it in an internal database than it is to have it posted, maybe even an old resume, like up on, like I said, Archinect or Issue. It's like if somebody's searching for you, they might find outdated material. So having new materials with somebody who's strategically keeping an eye out can be very beneficial. But I think we're also seeing a change in how people work. So there's also contract work, which Bespoke can facilitate. We do a W-2 hiring as opposed to 1099 independent contractor, which has good tax implications and employer support. And obviously there's been an uptick in freelance design, which can be through freelance websites like Upwork, where you're paid hourly or by project. Quick resources, obviously bespokecareers.com, come check out our job board. There's also lots of job boards on LinkedIn, Archinect, Indeed, and specific to Los Angeles. AIA Los Angeles has their job board. There's Facebook groups, there's city departments. City of LA is a great resource. I believe IIDA and other membership organizations. There's lots of opportunities to tap into other places where jobs are posted. Just because it's not on LinkedIn, trust me, there's more out there. And I think it's also important to mention firms' web pages. It costs to post a job online. So some firms might just have an internal system where they keep track of everything. So you can check out, sort of dive into certain websites, scroll to the bottom, look up careers, jobs, and that firm's name in Google and find sort of more harder to reach roles. And then I gotta hurry up because I've got like 10 minutes here, but I want to quickly jump into LinkedIn to talk a little bit about these points, which are ways to feed the algorithm and maximize your LinkedIn presence, because it's pretty wild to see what a big effect updating your LinkedIn can have on your personal professional endeavors. Even if it's project pitching and working with the firm that you're with and you intend to stay with for the rest of your life, there's lots of ways to optimize your LinkedIn profile. So the number one thing, I mean, this is me, it's so cheesy. The number one thing to do with LinkedIn, like many social media platforms, is to feed the algorithm. So across social media and the website, the currency of reach, of getting to the ideal audience, is fueled by the quality of the data you provide the platform. And that sounds like super big brother and weird, but long story short, LinkedIn wants your information. So the more information you give it, the more it will amplify your posts. And this is something that I was actually just looking up, because I think you can see it. I've got my phone in front of here. You can see here on my private dashboard how it says All-Star. All-Star basically means that you've given LinkedIn all the information it wants, and All-Star profiles are 40 times more likely to receive job opportunities. That's a huge amount of much more likely, 40 times more likely. And how do you create an All-Star profile? The first thing, pretty basic, is to have a profile picture. But I say basic, and there's lots of people who just have like the blank shadow man. You want to just throw a professional picture of yourself up on LinkedIn. It doesn't have to be a headshot like the one I have from Nico at AIA LA, but it's great to have something that at least shows your face or, you know, shoulders and up. It's also really easy to put in a headline picture. I got mine on like Upsplash or Pixels, where you can just access and download free images. I searched in Los Angeles skyline and the blues match, so I put it up there. It's a great place where you can highlight a project that you're working on or something that you love in terms of design. There's, back to canva.com, there's even the template for the size of that banner so that you can make sure that what you're putting up is like well suited to the formatting of the page. So yeah, profile picture, you want to have your headline. My headline, architecture consultant and creative storyteller, is pretty basic just because I'm not job seeking. I'm not like selling myself on the internet. I just want people to know who I am if I reach out to them. But you can obviously be more creative with that headline, you know, project manager with 15 years of experience in Los Angeles. Send me a message if you want to talk about education projects or something. Like, this is your opportunity to stand out, and this headline follows you where you go. So you can see, like, if I go here, this guy, I follow him for his recruiter memes, but he says recruiter, 18 years, resume and LinkedIn profile reviews and edits all industries. So he's just saying in his headline, it follows him around on the internet what he does. You want to have your industry and your location. I think they changed industry a little bit, so it's not on this main page, but I've got Los Angeles here. You want to have your experience, at least 2 firms. And Sarah, I think you brought this up, like how to show your experience if you've changed positions. I would put current position. That way you have the full range of your years at that firm. And then you could mention in your description, joined as project architect, and now I'm studio director or whatever it is. So you want to have at least 2 of your past experiences on here. I use mine as sort of a way to describe the firm itself, because some of these offices are less well known outside of the design community. But you could just copy and paste what you have on your resume in terms of bullet points about what you've been working on. It's up to you. You can add links, you can add attachments. I like to just, like I said, give it the information that it wants. You also want to have your skills. Skills was a part of LinkedIn that started off, I think it like read it off of your resume, but you can add skills as you see relevant. You don't have to stick with the ones that you are here. Again, I'm not job seeking, so I haven't really done anything with my skills, but you usually want them to be relevant to your industry. So project management, architecture, Revit, client communication, or whatever it is. And we'll talk about that quickly when I jump into the jobs. You want to have your education in terms of where you went to school or what type of programs that you've done. You want to have as many connections as you can. You want to have at least 50 to become an all-star, but 500 plus also amplifies your reach. And then you want to have your about summary. So again, mine's pretty basic because I'm not job seeking on here. But up to 3 lines of text will show as the summary for your about, but you can list much more. And it's an opportunity to, again, put that statement about who you are. What do you want people to know about you when they come across your profile online? Yeah, Carol?
Can sorry, I hate to add this thing to you, but this LinkedIn is not just about trying to find a job, LinkedIn is also as something that can be used to help your firm bring in work and advertise you. So don't be afraid to reach out to your firm, to your internal marketing department to help you write some of this stuff. They will want to help promote you as well, because what you do then helps them promote the firm. And so this isn't just a you thing. A lot of firms are starting to really try and tap into LinkedIn as a way to promote projects and to promote the firm, to try and entice people to come to work, you know, and all that stuff. So don't be afraid to reach out to your own firm to help you write some of this.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And I like you said, it's sometimes a lot of work, but obviously there's advantages for everyone involved to have that amplified experience and platform online. And just by doing those sort of basic details of LinkedIn, I read the same statistic in the article today, only 51% of LinkedIn users have fully completed profiles. So it's a really easy way to stick out from the crowd by just showing that you've spent 30 minutes, an hour updating your LinkedIn to at least show where you're at right now. If you are job seeking on LinkedIn, there's more like different things you can go into for showing recruiters that you're open to opportunities. Again, editing the skills to match jobs that you're interested in. If you have the opportunity to do like the free 1 month LinkedIn Premiere, that's really helpful because it can show how you compare to other job seekers. It can like help you more with the skills. I was going to try to find a role that has skills listed, but you can see like when I click on jobs, the first thing it shows me, now it's showing me nothing. Suggested job searches, they have recommended for me based on what I've given LinkedIn in terms of the information. And usually within these jobs, it's comparing what the job description is with the information that I've given my past professional experience. So it's sort of like creating this matrix overlay of what you bring to the table and what somebody is looking for. And that's showing up for the person posting the job as well, showing like who's best suited to this experience based on what they have in their profile. So great practice in general to mimic the words and the way people are talking and the language of this job post or your potential employer or your potential client in what you're giving them. So having that sort of like mutual language. I think design, and I've known after a year of working with architects and designers with Bespoke, is that it tends to like speak its own language. And so you have like SD to CA in LA with like LADBC or LAUSD. That doesn't necessarily translate. So being able to say, I work on academic projects, I do schematic design, I work one-on-one with clients to build the home of their dreams. However you can make the languages match, that's also going to be advantageous. Last thing I would mention is use LinkedIn to your network advantage and reach out to connections. It's a great way to see if you have connections that work at a place, or seeing somebody who went to the same school as you took a class in. And there's also sort of a way to, if I go back to the home screen, I was just going to show kind of harder in, so this is a good example. Say you're like obsessed with a company that you want to work with. Oh, no, it's not working. You can search a name in the search bar and it can show you all these subcategories, right? So you could go to jobs, you might not find something in jobs. So then you could go back and you can look at, oh man, now it's gonna take me down a wormhole, but you can go into posts. And then you can find information about like, what are people talking about? What type of projects are coming up right now? Like what else is going on the internet? You can do this with a client too. Say you want to work with like I said, LAUSD. Los Angeles Unified School District. Now it's probably just going to take me straight here, but you can follow them. You can look at posts, you can look at jobs, you can sort of like keep your ear to the ground. That's what social media is all about, is sort of like leveraging this giant network and making it lead back to more professional opportunities. So that's my LinkedIn and CV spiel. I've got a little bit more in terms of leveraging your network. We just talked about that, video tips and sort of prep for interviews. I can pass these along to Carol and AWA+D for future events, because I think they're just quick little easy tips to share. I think just if I had to say it in 2 words, it would just be to really prepare and know who you're talking to. And that's every stage, from writing that cover letter and putting together your CV to showing up on a video interview. Having a clear idea of who your audience is and trying to cultivate this authentic connection with who you're talking to, who you want to be working with, and sort of like doing that sales thing. It doesn't have to be cheesy. It doesn't have to be awkward. It can just be you putting forward who you are genuinely into the world, and somebody's going to pick it up. And that's what it's all about.
Thank you so much, Natalie. That was amazing. And so just to give Natalie credit, she spent a lot more time on the interviews, or on the resume stuff, because we told her we're having another session that is specifically about interview skills. And so please, please, please go to AWA+D.org and sign up, and we're going to try and help out and do some best practices and give some sample questions, and we're going to break out and do some interview practice, so that anyway, we've got some great upcoming events. But this resume and LinkedIn thing was amazing. I hope everybody really enjoyed it. But I really want, if you've got another 5 minutes, if anybody has any questions that didn't get answered, or didn't, that you thought of as we were going, if you're willing to stay on, Natalie, we would love to be able to let some people ask some questions as we go. So anybody, like, write them in the chat, just throw it out there, speak up, do whatever.
I have a question.
Mhm.
So I have 2 degrees. One, the first degree I have is completely unrelated to our industry now. And so if I exclude that education on my resume, I look 5 years younger, essentially. So is it of value to eliminate my first degree, or because I'm 50 now, and so I'm not looking for a job, but I'm starting to panic about the next time I do have to look for a job?
That's a great question. I think if you don't see it as relevant and you see a benefit in shaving off 5 years of that time, like, why not? Because you can say, I did undergrad, you can say, oh, I did undergrad at USC or whatever. If it's something that you just want to add later on and have a conversation about, and what you went to for your master's or your second degree.
Yeah, I have 2 undergrads, totally unrelated to each other.
Exactly. So I don't see why not. I mean, I might include both on LinkedIn, because then those are networks in and of themselves, right? People who went to this school and people who went to that school. But if it's about like focusing on most relevant experience, then feel free to just tie in the most relevant academic degree you have.
Okay. Thank you.
Great.
I have a question.
Mhm.
What if, let's say that you have 12 years of experience and you have 9 jobs you've held in that time? Is it ever a good idea to omit one?
Great question. I think that, like I said, you want to really focus on relevance. So if there was a role in there, like, I mean, one thing that I would say, I worked in restaurants in the food world my entire life, and you won't find that anywhere on my LinkedIn profile because it's just not relevant to what I'm doing right now. If all of those jobs have been design jobs and all of them are relevant in some capacity, I'd have them all on there. You could sort of condense them and say, like, I was a project manager at various firms, and then you could list like more specifics to those firms or that experience if you really wanted to summarize and sort of like put it all together. I know that generally there's sort of this unspoken taboo in the design world where like jumping around is looked at as less than ideal. But I think that's also like in tandem with like the current world where people have lost jobs in this last year, people have had to take a job because they needed to pay their rent. I think that that mindset is shifting. And if you want to put your experience forward in a way that's like not manipulated, but a little bit more of a summary, then again, it's something you can clarify if it gets you to an interview later. Don't lie about your experience or like, you know, manipulate it in any way. But if you want to summarize it and just give a more general sense of what you've been doing, and it was a handful of years back, I don't think that that's a bad practice.
Okay,
I have
well,
a
thanks.
question, if I can go next.
Who has a question?
Oh,
Somebody
I
has
have a question, if it's okay, if I can jump in.
Mhm.
I have a question about software. So I've been at a firm where we use ArchiCAD, which is really atypical, and I've been there for like 10 years, and everyone's on Revit, and people are Revit pros. They're phenomenal at it. Everyone wants this Revit whiz. So I was like, well, I'm going to teach myself Revit. But I'm never going to be that person who is the pro, and you know, I'll get into an office and they're going to, I'm worried they'll be disappointed. And I feel it's sort of silly because I know software can be learned, and I don't think it's the most important attribute one should be looking for in a new employee. I have a lot of other things to offer, but it's always a stumbling block. And I'm wondering how to handle something like this.
Great question. I think there's a few different components of that. Like, one is that an interview is an opportunity for you to also be asking the employer, right? And so you can be asking like, what type of software do you use in office? Do you offer training for Revit to new employees? Do you have professional development seminars or lunch and learns where you encourage like, you know, different new architectural technologies? So like you can kind of use that as a conversation starter. In terms of how I would sort of summarize that and put it forward on your resume, we were talking about that in the beginning with skills, right? You don't want to show that like Revit is the small amount of proficiency versus like ArchiCAD, which is the expert level, right? So you could say at your current firm, you learn software quickly, you've been teaching yourself or taking classes on Revit, you're interested in staying like current with software technology, you're most skilled in project management or like redlining documents or detailing certain aspects of the project, and focus on your strengths rather than what you don't know. But I think it's still important, like even if I had the most basic level of Revit skills ever, I would still have Revit on my resume because that in and of itself is a searchable term and searchable software. So you don't want to omit it, but you also want to be honest about where you're at and use that as sort of a conversation starter of saying something like, I'm super interested in changing technology. I teach myself and I read up on it all the time, and I would love to have more training in it. Right now, I'm currently managing projects and doing, you know, redlining or producing documentation and detailing in this specific software, which I recognize is not being maybe the most dynamic, but it's what our standards are.
So put Revit on the resume, but in an interview, talk up your enthusiasm about learning it in ways that you can improve, or the fact that you know you learn quickly or whatever.
Totally. And I think there's a certain level where it's like, no one is going to be asking you to be like the CAD monkey, right? When you come in, that's so much more right now, you know, production staff. And so being able to highlight what it is that you do to work with your team to make sure that the complete documentation set is created, and sort of like talking more about those strengths rather than like, oh, sorry, I'll never be the fastest at Revit. Like, I don't know how anybody is.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So Natalie, we have a question in the chat, and it says for people who plan to jump from a firm that specializes in single-family residential projects to firms focusing on commercial project, what's your advice for a resume?
Great question. I think there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. One is the biggest one is to show your value. Just because you worked in one typology your whole life doesn't mean that none of those skills transfer to the next typology. So talking about the day-to-day interactions you have with your in-house design team, that you have with the client, that you have with subcontractors, talking about innovative ways you've solved a problem for a client, that is across typologies. If you worked one-on-one with a client doing something unique or innovative, that's a great way to just like spark the connection of how you would fit into a commercial project that has literally the same clients in a lot of ways. I'd also pursue ways that you can get a little bit of experience in that typology. I volunteer with the Open Architecture Collaborative Los Angeles, and one of the things we do is to work with communities or nonprofits that can't afford traditional design services to do projects like an ADU pilot or a small cafe or academic project. And so maybe there's a way for you to also plug in and join a competition or a volunteer project, or maybe do something freelance for a friend who has like a tiny little retail shop somewhere, and being able to sort of challenge yourself. I mean, it's kind of hard coming from the architecture world where I know you all work like 50, 60-hour weeks, but any way that you can sort of create a tie-in to that typology and show your enthusiasm for that type of work outside of maybe a somewhat limited firm or like traditional typology. Does that make sense?
So I know that we're 15 minutes over our time, and I'm gonna cut it off here. I think that was a really great answer to that question. So thank you for that. I think this has been a really spectacular presentation. A lot of really good information. If everybody can turn off their mute, and round of applause for Natalie, because this was totally